Hello, I'm Dave Hart. I'm the preacher for the Winslow, Arizona Church of Christ, and I'm so glad you've chosen to join me today. Today we're going to start a series of lessons entitled Church Growth. Church growth. Church growth is something that every Christian should be concerned about, and we're going to look at different aspects of it in the next few weeks, Lord willing. And this first week here, we're going to look at increasing members for church growth. And this tends to be the area that we look at the most and we put the most emphasis on, and it is for sure an extremely important aspect of church growth. But it's not the only aspect of church growth. In other words, you can grow a church to be quite huge, like some of the mega churches out there, but you're not teaching the right things, and you're not truly making people disciples, right? You're getting them in there under false pretense. You're not teaching them how and what the Bible says that you must truly do to be saved and to stay saved. So even when it comes to increasing members, we can't just do it just for the sake of members. I've often said, told the people here in this congregation where I serve, that if we want to fill this church up, I know how to do it next week. I can guarantee that I could fill this church building up. All I'd have to do is put one little ad out there in the paper and say everybody that would come to church next Sunday would receive $100. Now, I have no doubt that they'd be lining up down the street. But would they come back next week? Probably not. Probably not a one of them. So even though members are extremely important, numbers are important, they're not the only aspect of growth. And we will be looking at these different aspects as we go along. But today we are going to look at members and increasing members. You know, I've been a minister now for probably around 30 or so years. And when I first became a minister, it was an exciting time in the church. Every 2 or 3 years, there'd be a book that would come out that would have a list of the membership of the Church of Christ. And of course, these things can never be exact with the Church of Christ, right? Because we don't have any centralized headquarters, but they did the best they could. And they'd have how many members, how many adherents. Adherents are people who go regularly but have not become a member, which would be children or sometimes spouses that have not become Christians, or just some people in general that show up for church all the time but have not become a member of the Lord's church, and the number of churches that are out there. And for me, when I first became a minister all those many years ago now, I was always so excited to get this book that would come out, Churches of Christ in the United States. And they haven't done one for a few years now, but I hear that they're going to. But I'm not as excited as I was back then, because every time it come out, all three of those categories, numbers of members, number of adherents, number of churches, always was growing. It was always growing. And it was like that for the first few books that came out when I was starting out in my work in ministry all those years ago. Then we had a book or two where it just kind of leveled off. It just wasn't growing. And I remember thinking back then, okay, it's going to pick up. Next time, it's going to pick up next time. And I kind of anticipate the next time that it come out. Okay, this is just a little bump in the road. But sadly, from that point on, those three statistics, number of members, adherents, number of churches, started going down. And every book that came out since then, it was a little less in those three categories. And of course, that made me really sad. That's not what we want. We want it to grow. Population's growing in America, right? So just that alone should mean more members in the church, right? But sadly, it started shrinking. But the Church of Christ is not alone in this. And in fact, from what I have read, even though we are shrinking in those three areas, we are doing it much slower than pretty much every other group out there. This is a problem for pretty much every group, every group, not in the Lord's church, but in the denominational churches. Shrinking, losing members, losing churches. I read an article not too long ago where there's a lot of churches out there in the denominational world that they just can't get preachers even to work in the churches anymore. And I hear this is a real problem in the Catholic Church because, of course, in the Catholic Church, you just can't have a layperson get up and perform the ordinances that they have in their church. It has to be an ordained priest, and they're having a hard time getting enough priests to be able to be in their churches. And them, like all of the church, pretty much all the churches out there, are shrinking. The only one that seems to be kind of holding their own, from what I'd read recently, not too long ago anyway, was the Mormons. And it wasn't because the Mormons are converting people, it's just because the Mormons have a whole bunch of children, and at least some of them are staying in the church. And it's always been tough. Listen, it's always been hard to grow a church. The first work that I worked at as a paid preacher, paid minister, felt very blessed. The church there was about 80, 90 members, and in a few years' time, it was up over 260. And I was just thinking, okay, this is the way it's going to go. This is how it's going to go from now on. But that's not the way it's been. As I've gone on and worked other places and stuff, I've seen that it's hard. Some places are harder than others. We know that. But it's never easy to grow a church. And then we had COVID. A lot of churches were kind of holding their own and doing, somewhat okay. And then COVID hit. And I really thought, my own thinking was of COVID, with the death, it would get people thinking about death and their lives and things like that it might be a catalyst for church growth. But it hasn't been. So many churches have shrunk greatly since COVID. And I know there's exceptions out there. I've talked to different ministers and people in different churches out there that there's a lot of exceptions, but in general, most of the churches have shrunk and they've not been able to get back up again. And I was just talking to a missionary that does work over in Eastern Europe, and he said the same thing over there, the same thing ever since COVID. They've just had a hard time at getting back up again, getting their numbers back up again. I'm hearing all the time of churches closing, even some churches that have been, I guess I could use the term, real powerhouse churches in the past. Churches that were very strong, large churches, did significant work in the brotherhood. In fact, I just heard of one the other week that they put out the little magazine called The Spiritual Sword for many years. And I was just shocked to hear at that church, and it was in Tennessee, and they're doing a whole lot better in Tennessee than in most places, but that church has closed its doors. Very sad. And so many churches are getting down to just a few members, usually older members, and they're feeling discouraged. And a lot of churches are not having as many services anymore. I hear all the time of churches that stop having evening service, stop having Wednesday service. In fact, we had a visitor some visitors from that usually goes to a church in another town here close by us on a Wednesday night, and I thought that they were just maybe up here in Winslow or something, and they couldn't get back to their congregation in time for Wednesday night service, but they told me no, that church is not having Wednesday night services anymore. And I just also read this last week with one of our colleges, and it's not the first one to do this, but Oklahoma Christian College is going to stop having a preacher training, Bible training program, because they just don't have enough people interested in it. And several other Church of Christ sponsored colleges that have produced preachers for many, many years now. Of course, some of our colleges have really got off course, haven't they? And maybe it's not such a bad thing that they're not producing ministers, and some of them anyway. But several of them now have either closed down their Bible training department for preachers, or they've scaled back on it. And sadly, I know of one that they're going to send their students to a Baptist seminary instead of it being done there on their campus. Very sad times, very sad times. So what are we to do? What are we to do? Are we to throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, it's over and let's give up and let's quit? And no, not at all. Not at all. We must do our best as a church body and as individuals in that body to fulfill the Great Commission given to us by Jesus. Every church and every Christian is commanded to do his best, and we're going to look at those passages about the Great Commission in just a few moments here. But we're to do the best that we can to bring people to the Lord. Will it work? Will it work? Well, it sure is not going to work if we don't do that. Can't guarantee that it'll work. We can do our best. We can do our best and still not bring people, because we can't force people to come. I am sure that Noah did his best to preach to his generation to get on that boat, to get on that ark. But he wasn't able to convince anybody and wasn't able to get any of those people saved, was he? But he did save himself, and he saved his family, and in so doing, he saved each and every one of us. So God doesn't require us to be successful as we see success. I mean, I would love to fill the building. That's my desire, is to fill the church building with people each and every Sunday. But God's idea of success is each individual and each church being faithful and doing the best that they can, We see that all throughout the Old Testament, don't we? God would send prophets, try to get these people to get right. Sometimes they would listen, a lot of times they wouldn't, but they were still required to give these people the opportunity as we are. And I believe we're still not so far gone that if we put our best effort forwards, there's certainly going to be people that come. I have no doubt of that. I believe that of all of my heart. Listen, I was just reminded of that here just a few weeks ago. We have an older man here, and he has a lot of physical problems, but he walks around a lot. He likes to get out and get his exercise, and he walks around with a cane, and he takes a bunch of our business cards that we have for the church, and he just hands them out everywhere. I have to fill up our little holders for these business cards like every time we have a service, because he just takes a handful of them and he gives them out. Well, the other week we had somebody call here and say that they wanted to come to church. Can we provide a ride? And that's one of the things, the services that we try to have here to reach out, as we provide a bus and a van to bring people into the service here. We have, and I'm sure it's probably that way where you're at too, we have a lot of people here that don't seem to have transportation. We have a lot of poor people around here. So we kept quite busy bringing in poor people, disabled, young people, children, all that stuff. But he came. And that first night that he come, I did a sermon, and I talked about baptism, and afterwards, when I had the invitation, he come up and said, I want to be baptized, and he had told me about how he wanted to get baptized many times in the past, but it just seems like something always happened and didn't work out. And anyway, we're able to baptize him into the Lord's church. And it's all because this man that's definitely not in the best of health takes these cards and he just passes them out. So don't tell me there aren't people out there. Don't tell me there aren't people out there. But we've got to put the work in. And it's harder work than it has been in the past. We must teach and make disciples and train the new converts to the best of our abilities. And a lot of times new converts can be the best sources of even bringing in more new people. I've seen that so many times. You know, somebody's been in the church 20, 30 years. They have the same job. They see a lot of the same people. They've invited a lot of the people they've known. But you bring in a new convert, well, he has a whole new set of people that he knows that he can invite. It can be a great source to keep the ball rolling there, can it? So we mustn't get discouraged, no matter how hard it can be not to. Because believe me, I have to fight it all the time. I have to fight it all the time. As I told you, the work that I worked at before here, we had a good steady rise in numbers of members in just a few years' time, and it was exciting. But since I've been here in Winslow for the last 20 years, it's been up and down, up and down. There's been a few times of thinking, oh, we've got up to this number, and it looks like it's going to keep going, and we got this new people, and then the next year we've shrunk back down again. We have a big problem here of people moving on us. There's not a lot of jobs and resources and things like that. So it's hard to keep people in this town. I know how many people just in the last year we've lost because they've moved away to someplace else. But so it's hard to not get discouraged, but we can't. We got to keep pushing forward. We are commanded by God to do the best that we can to reach the lost. We are commanded by God to do the best that we can to reach the lost. And each of us have different sets of skills, abilities, different people that we know, that we come in contact with. Even people in the same household. Look, my wife, she works out the prison, and she goes out there and she's in contact with people that I'm not in contact with. And I'll go down to the gym or something and come in contact with people that she's not in contact with. So we all of us have people and there again, abilities, resources. There's many different ways to evangelize, right? I know people that are just so outgoing, man. They'll just go out and just look at a stranger and just go right up and start a conversation and start talking about God and the church and if they're saved, and that's wonderful. But not everybody's like that. Some people, they're good at knocking on doors. They'll go out there and knock on doors all day, and they enjoy that interaction. There's other people that they dread to knock on that door, right? But the thing is that even though we have different personalities and talents and gifts, we have to learn to use them the best that we can to reach as many people as we can. You may not be somebody who can just go up to strangers or to knock doors, but don't tell me there's nothing that you can do, because there certainly is. There certainly is. And as I said before, even if we make the best effort and no one comes, I don't believe that would happen, but if that was the fact of it, at least we would save our own souls in doing what God has asked us to do, right? So let's get into some of the passages today that we're going to be looking at. The first one is 1 Corinthians 9, verse 16. 1 Corinthians 9, 16. For if I preach the gospel, Paul speaking here, I have nothing to boast of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yes, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. So Paul is saying that, I can't go around boasting. Yeah, I'm preaching the gospel. Look at me. Look how good I am. Look at, and of course we got to avoid that kind of attitude, right? Because Paul's saying, no, it's not about that. It's about, woe if I don't preach the gospel, because the necessity is laid upon him and the necessity is laid upon you. It's necessary for us to preach the gospel. Why is it necessary? Well, it's necessary because God says we're supposed to do it there again to save our own souls. And it's necessary because if souls are going to be saved, this is more than likely how it's going to be done. I've said so many times over the years that there are so few people that would just go and pick up a Bible and open it up and say, oh yeah, I want to become a Christian. And even if they did that, they'd have a hard time, wouldn't they? They wouldn't know what church to go to. They wouldn't know who was teaching the truth or even what the truth was at that point, would they? They'd just open up a Bible, read some verses, and no. Happens very few times, and like I said, even if it did, they're going to probably do an awful lot of stumbling in the dark till they find the truth, if they're able to find it at all, because Christianity is a taught religion. It's a taught religion. Am I saying don't read your Bible? No, absolutely not. You need to read your Bible. You need to study. You need to know what it says. But we also need good teachers. Listen, I've been doing this for many, many years now. Been a Christian since I was 12 years old. Been in the church since then. I've been to church schools, on and on and on. But I still look for good teachers. I still look for good teachers because I certainly don't know it all by any means. And I'm still learning. I'm still a student. Every one of us, I don't care who you are, how much study you've put in, how long you've been a Christian, we are still students. We are still students. I remember my mother, she loved God. She loved God's Word, and she studied the Bible after Bible after Bible. I remember after she passed away, there was a drawer in her house, and I opened it up, and it was full of worn-out Bibles. I mean, these Bibles, they were worn out from her studying them. She could never get herself to throw a Bible away. She would wear it out, put it in her little closet there, little cabinet, and then get a new Bible and wear that one out. But she was a student. She studied and she studied and she studied. So no, I'm not saying that we're not to study the Bibles on ourselves by any means. We certainly are. But we need teachers. We need teachers, people who maybe know certain aspects or understand something a little better than we do, or have a better viewpoint, a new viewpoint. And there again, this is Paul saying our necessity for his own salvation, but necessity to bring people to the Lord. To bring people to the Lord. It's people who bring people. It's people who bring people. That's why Jesus went everywhere preaching, right? Remember that, Pat? He went everywhere preaching. He went everywhere preaching. Why did he do that? If people could just stumble into it themselves, why would he need to do that? No, he went everywhere preaching. So Paul said out of necessity for his salvation, out of necessity to bring others people to Christ. To bring other people to Christ. And remember, don't just think it's the preacher's job or the elder's job. And in fact, in pretty much any church you're going to go to, and I've done this here in Winslow, and I've noticed the same everywhere. I'll ask the people on Sunday morning in church. I've done this a couple of times here through the years. How many of you are here as a Christian as a direct result of a preacher or an elder working with you? And usually there'll be a couple here or there. And then I'll say, how many are here because of a family member or a friend or just somebody from the church working with you. And pretty much all the hands go up. All the hands go up. It's not just the preacher's job. Oh, the preacher's to lead the way. He's to be the head evangelist, so to speak, in the church. He is to teach others how to evangelize, those kind of things. But listen, in most churches, who is the minister with the most? Is it people of the world or is it people in the church? Most of the time it's people in the church. I know of some churches that are trying to change that somewhat. They're trying to free up the preacher's time, to allow him time to get out there in the community. And I know for me, that's been a big help of me. I've tried to find places where I could be out in the community and talk to people. My biggest place for that has been health clubs. Go down to the health club, and I've worked out, all my life, know how to train people, talk the talk, walk the walk, and I'll start talking to these people, and through the years, been able to bring many, many people over to the Lord by doing that. Get them to come to service, get them to thinking about God. So it's important to give your ministers time to do that, but if they're going to take time to do that, it's going to take time away from some of the stuff the church generally wants to tie them up with, right? And then the church gets them so tied up with everything that has to do with the church, and they say, well, why aren't you out there bringing people in? Well, he's only got so much time. So give him some time, encourage him to get out there, maybe go to a coffee shop or a health club or some other hobby or thing to get out there and to get in the community. But even then, he's only one person, right? He's only one person. Every member is to go out there and do the best that they can to bring people to Christ. And what did Paul say here? He says, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. Woe is me and woe is you if I do not preach the gospel. So we have got to see ourselves as being missionaries. We talk about missionaries and think about missionaries, and growing up, I always had that image of a missionary going into maybe deepest, darkest Africa, and lions and bears and tigers and headhunters and all that kind of stuff. And of course there is that aspect of it, isn't there? But we're all to be missionaries. We ought to have a mission, and to go out there and to spread the gospel and to do the best that we can, and woe to us if we don't. Now let's look at a couple of passages that I talked about earlier about the Great Commission, Mark 16, 15 and 16. Now listen, these next two passages that we're going to look at, this is right before Jesus went back into heaven. Don't you think that, everything Jesus said, it was important, right? But don't you think right before he went back, he was going to give some very important instructions, and that he did. So let's look at Mark 16, 15, and 16. And he said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. So what is he saying here? And he's saying, go into all the world. That means we're to go everywhere. We're to go everywhere. And listen, our generation, with the generation that we have now, we're able to do that better than any generation in the past. Think of who Jesus was talking to here. They didn't have planes and motorboats and jets and cars and all the things that we have today. They had to walk everywhere, go by donkey, get on a boat that might take, several weeks to get from place to place. But we can go all over the world very quickly. But going into all the world means also going to our neighbors, I know people that, I want to be a missionary and I want to go to Japan or I want to go to China or whatever, but they won't go next door to their neighbors. They won't go next door to their neighbors. And listen, it's important to evangelize the world. I'm for that. Let's do that. But let's make the priority. Let's make the priority on the local work that we're doing. More about that later. So go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. That means everyone, everyone. We need to be preaching to the old people. Listen, the old people ain't got as many years left, do they? They're running out of time. We need to preach to the young people. Oh boy, and of course we know young people sometimes don't live all that long either, don't they? But isn't it wonderful to bring a young person to the Lord at a young age, and how much more work they're able to do and how much pain and suffering they're able to avoid and wise choices they're able to make if we can bring them. We're to bring every nationality. Racism, that's a sin, folks. That's a sin. We see that going on right now, don't we? We see that going on right now. We see a lot of people that hating Jews right now. Sad situation. But we have all kinds of different racism out there. It's wrong. It's wrong. It doesn't matter if they're rich or poor. It doesn't matter their education level. In fact, some of the harder people to bring to the Lord are the rich and educated. Those are the ones we like to bring, right? We like to bring the famous people, the rich people, the educated people. But a lot of times, unfortunately, they're the ones that are the hardest to bring, the ones that reject the Lord the most. Remember years ago, a man was talking about how he worked overseas as a missionary in a poor country, and he said it was, as far as work goes, it was relatively easy to convert those people. They were looking for some hope. They didn't have a whole lot of hope in this world, and they were looking for some hope. And he said that they were fairly easy to convert. Now, he said there was a problem there because he said, unfortunately, you go in there and convert them, but then the next group would come in and do the same thing, which is kind of a problem. But he said these people, were looking for hope. They were looking for something. But then he talked about living in a rich part of California and trying to convert people. And he said, man, he couldn't get anywhere with those people. They just didn't want to talk about it. They didn't have time for it. They were living the good life. They weren't concerned about it. But we need to preach to everybody. Listen, didn't Jesus do that? We see Jesus sometimes just working with one individual, don't we? Other times a small group, other times a larger group, and sometimes a very large group. We see Jesus working with the Samaritan woman, a single woman, a very sinful woman at the well, right? And we also see him working with Nicodemus, somebody of a much higher social status, so to speak. So we are to preach the gospel to every creature. And don't forget the young. Don't forget the young. Listen, so many of our young people, I got a little upset at a minister a while back that was saying, it's not our responsibility to teach the young people. They're supposed to learn the gospel at home. That's the home's duty to do that, and the church doesn't need to worry about that. And I didn't like that at all, because I tell you what, we here in Winslow, we do our best to work with the young people. And so many of these young people are coming from very bad situations, and they're not getting anything about God and his love and truth at home. And when they come here and they get to hear about it, you should see just the attitude change that they have and how much they just love to be at church and all that kind of stuff. So no, don't neglect the young people. I've said many times before, the statistic is that most people will choose to come to the Lord before they're 14 years old. Well, if most people are going to make that choice, yes or no, before they're 14, don't you think we should be working with those under 14? So, preach the gospel to every creature. And of course, he who believes and is baptized will be saved. Lord tells us what to do there in order to be saved. In my internet ministry that I work with all kinds of people, I get all the time, oh, you don't got to be baptized. You don't have to be baptized. Yeah, you don't got to be saved either, do you? Bible says right here, he who believes and is baptized. And is, that means that you got to do that too, will be saved. He who does not believe will be condemned. So let's look at the other Great Commission passage that we have there. Again, something that Jesus spoke just a little bit before he went back to heaven. Matthew 28, verse 19. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit. So he tells us to go therefore again. That means we got to get out of the church building. Listen, church buildings are wonderful places. I love the church building. Not because it's anything other than a building, but it is a building dedicated to the work of God. And it can be all kinds of preaching and teaching and classes, and it can be large enough to fit everybody that's coming. And it's just a very useful tool. It's a very useful tool. Do you got to have a church building? No, you can meet under a tree. You can meet in somebody's house. And listen, I've met in people's houses and stuff before in house churches many years ago. And I much prefer having the dedicated building set up for that. But that's not where the evangelizing goes on at. It says, go therefore. Go therefore. Years ago, there was a movie out called The Field of Dreams, and it said, if you build it, they will come. If you build this baseball field, they will come. That may be true for baseball, but it's not true for Christianity. It's not true for Christianity. Oh, every once in a while, I'll have somebody that will come by and just want to come into the church building and look around, or come by the church building to see if I'm here or something. And I was able to, was it last summer, I think, a lady was walking by and heard me actually doing my sermon here for YouTube, and she come in and wanted to find out about the church, and was able to baptize her, so once in a while that happens, but not very often. Bible says we got to go. We got to get out there. We got to go therefore and make disciples. What are disciples? Disciples are learners. Disciples are followers of all the nations. There again is talking about all the people, all the nations. And then we got to baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So that's the process there. We got to get out there, get to teaching them, get them to follow Christ, and then baptize them so they can be put into the Lord's church. Let's talk about the main mission that Christ had. The main mission that Christ had. Listen, we know there was many things that Christ did when he was here on earth, and many, many things that he accomplished. But this passage is going to tell us what the main thing was, what his focus was. It was kind of like in World War II, we'd send our B-17s in, and they would have a main mission. They'd say, okay, we want this bomb, this factory bomb, this factory's making tanks or whatever, and that's number one. And if you can hit that factory, great, but here are secondary targets. Jesus had a lot of secondary targets. Are those targets important? Yes. Just like with the B-17s, you had the main target, but the other targets were important also. But Jesus had a main target. Luke 19:10 tells us what it is. For the Son of Man has come, Jesus, Son of Man, this is why he's come, to seek and to save that which was lost. Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. That was Jesus' main mission. And if that was Jesus' main missions, and we're supposed to be Christians, Christ-like people, what should our main mission be? Listen, a church is to have three focuses: edification, building up the body, teaching the body, fellowshipping; benevolence, helping those that you're able to help and are worthy of help; and evangelizing, or seeking the lost. Seeking the lost. And we got to keep all three of those. All three of those things is the main thing. But listen, we can do benevolence. We can feed somebody. We can get them medical help. We can build them a house. Good things, right? But he's still going to lose his soul if we don't tell him about Christ. Edification, building up the body. We're not going to have a body to build up unless we seek and teach the lost how to be saved, are we? We can be very good at edifying. I know a lot of churches of Christ, the ones I grew up in, were very good at edifying, having Bible classes, things like that, sermons, but they weren't so good at seeking the lost. Seeking the lost. So, if Jesus come to seek, and there again, seek, we got to seek them. We got to look for them. And it's not hard to find them. No, you go down the grocery store and start looking around. You'll find the lost. It's not hard to find. But you got to seek them out. You got to go after them. You got to go after them and to seek them. And as I said earlier, we have more advantages than anybody has ever had in the history of the world to seek the lost. We have all kinds of technology. We have, cars and things like that to go in. But we also have the internet. We also have the internet. Every Christian, I believe, should have their own ministry on the internet. And there's so many different ways to do that, so many different avenues. You can send out a little text message to people. You can have a Facebook page. You can use Twitter and all these other things out there. I don't know how some of them work because I put a focus on just a few things, and it takes a lot of time to do that. I'd like to do even more, but don't have time to do everything, especially if I'm going to try to do it well. But we need to seek. We need to seek. Do everything that we can to seek and to save the lost. Romans 10, verse 1. Romans 10, verse 1. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they may be saved. So this was Paul here speaking about wanting his own countrymen saved. He loved the Jewish people. He loved the Jews. He was a Jew of Jews, trained under some of the head Jewish people, and he loved his people. There's nothing wrong with loving your people. There's nothing wrong with loving Americans. Or if you're listening to me and you're from Canada or Africa or wherever, it's fine to love your people. We need to have a desire for your nation to be saved. I have a desire for Americans to be saved. Now, I want everybody to be saved. Don't take this wrong. I want everybody to be saved. But just like Paul said, he had this heart's desire for the Jewish people. I have a heart's desire for Americans to be saved. And there again, and I've been hearing this lately. They'll make a comment like on my ministry page. They'll say something like, yeah, well, we send all these missionaries and all this money over to Africa or Asia or wherever, but we need missionaries right here in America. And we do. Now, I don't think we should neglect sending them over to Africa and Asia and other places, but we need them here in America. We need missionaries. And as I said earlier, we're all to be a missionary, right? But what's wrong with us, if we're sending these missionaries overseas, what's wrong with us supporting missionaries here in America? getting some new churches started, going into new areas, helping some of these churches that are failing, that are closing, that have lost hope. It's wonderful to send money and mission work and all that stuff on the other side of the world. I'm so glad that's going on. But we might need that in our own cities right now, or the city next to us. We need to have a great desire to bring Americans to the Lord. Now, it's kind of funny how Christianity has moved, right? Started out in the Middle East, then it kind of moved over to Europe, where the strong center of it was, and then it's been in America, and of course it's kind of fading here and maybe other places, but growing in other places, I know that it is India and South America and stuff, but we need to do everything that we can to keep Christianity strong here. And strong wherever you might be, if you're listening in a different country, in a different nation. Let's care about world evangelism. I do what I can for that. I do what I can for that. There again, my internet ministry, I work with people all over the world. I have on a couple of my pages it shows me what countries and stuff that people are looking at, and it's wonderful. I'm able to work with people all over the world, able to see what I'm posting, what I'm doing. But I also have a great care and concern for Americans. Have a great care and concern for the city of Winslow where I live. And so should each and every one of you. Matthew 9:37 through 38. Matthew 9:37 through 38. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." So the Lord there again is telling us the harvest is plentiful. As I said, it's not easy to find the lost, is it? Go any place and you're going to find the lost. Sometimes even in the church. But it's not hard to find the harvest is out there. You ever seen pictures or been in a field where there's just tons and tons and tons and tons of grain for as far as you can see? The harvest is plentiful. But the workers are few. The workers are few. I've told my congregation here, sometimes you may have, around 30 people or so, and I say, look, I know compared to this city, there's very few of us, right? But we got our work cut out for us. We got our work cut out for us. And we know on the day of Pentecost, there was only the apostles, there 12 of them, but in their generation, they had been able to help spread the gospel to the whole known world, right? So, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. So there again, we have people who've dedicated their lives as missionaries, as preachers, to do the work full time. And I am so glad and I'm so thankful for those who do that. That, of course, is what I do here. I actually have to have another job to help support me here, but I work mostly full-time as a minister, and I'm so glad that I'm able to do that because there again, I can concentrate full-time on ministry. And we need to support these people. The Lord says to pray for these people, to send out these missionaries, to pray for preachers, elders, and people who are leading the charge, so to speak. The tip of the sword. All the sword's important, right? But you got a tip of the sword, and that tip is the most deadliest part of the sword, but it's also the most vulnerable, isn't it? It's also the most vulnerable. So we need to pray for the harvest. We need to pray that the Lord will send out people to work the harvest. But we also need to pray that our churches And each member will also be concerned about the harvest and do what they can to bring it in. And do what they can to bring it in. Acts 5, verse 42. Acts 5, verse 42. And daily in the temple and in every house they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. So the church had just begun. It was an exciting time. And what was going on? Now listen, we in the Church of Christ, we make a big, bold claim that we are the church. We are the New Testament church. We are the church that's found in Acts. We make that claim. But if we're going to make that claim, we better do all that we can to live that claim and do what they did. And what are they doing daily in the temple in every house? They were preaching in the temple. They were preaching in houses daily. They were out there evangelizing daily. They did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. They were out there evangelizing. They were out there growing the church each and every day. And I ask you, what are you doing every day? Are you doing something? Are you doing something every day? Think about it. What are you doing? What are you doing? Have you done something? Did you do something today? Did you do something yesterday? Have you done something in the last week to grow the church? And there again, there's so many ways to do that. You can go knock on a neighbor's door. You can hand some tracts out. You can support a missionary, support a church that needs supporting to keep going. There's all kinds of things you can do. There's no end to it. And one thing that everybody can do and everybody should do and everybody needs to do is invite. I know sometimes it's scary and some people have a real hard time with it, but listen, I often like to bring it back to this. When you're a young man, now I don't know about nowadays, but when I was a young man and you wanted to go out with a girl, you had to go ask her out. And sometimes they would say no. Sometimes they'd say no. Even to me, can you believe that? Sometimes they'd say no. And you'd feel dejected and you wouldn't like it and you're hoping for a different answer. But if guys quit inviting girls out because of that rejection, there wouldn't be many marriages going on, would there? You wouldn't be able to find a girlfriend more than likely. So you'd feel rejected and you'd be down about it, but it wouldn't stop you from inviting the next girl out, would it? In fact, when I was young, me and my friends, we'd go out and we'd go cruising. That was the thing to do. My town was go cruising. We'd cruise around. I had a Camaro and talk to girls and try and get their phone numbers. And we'd do that Friday night, Saturday night, and then Sunday night in the evening, later on in the evening, I like to go out to the movies with a girl. So I would look at the numbers that I had I was kind of a jerk, okay? And I'd set these numbers in line for the girl that I wanted to go to the movies with the most. And she said no, I'd go to the next one. She said no. And I'd just start calling. And usually it'd be maybe an hour before the movie started. Hey, you want to go to the movies? No, okay, well, bye. Then I'd call the next one. And sometimes I'd have to call several girls before one would say yes. Invite them to a Bible study. Invite them over to dinner to get to know them better. Invite them to go out fishing or hunting. And then I knew a guy that was in the church, and he was a pilot. And he would invite people. He has his own airplane. He'd invite people to go on an airplane ride with him. And he said that it was kind of cool. I know people do this with boats too. They get him up in the airplane, and he was kind of trapped, right? You start talking to him about church and God, and he didn't have any place he could go. and invite them to something. Invite them to something. I remember years ago, an older man, there was an older man, widow man, and there was a widowed woman in the church, and she would always invite this widowed man to potluck Sunday. Oh, he wasn't coming to anything else, but he came to potluck Sunday. And then he started coming all the time, and eventually I was able to baptize this man in his 80s. Invite. Everybody can invite. Everybody can invite. You may not be able to know all the answers to all the questions. You may be somebody that's hard for you to talk to other people, but you can invite. You can be like the man I was telling you about earlier today, and there again, he's had brain surgery and stuff, and he can't always talk so well, but he can hand out an invitation card and say, I'd love to have you come to church. I'd love to have you come to church. We can all invite, and we better be about inviting. You know, the world wants companionship. We're becoming more and more isolated. I was talking about this with some people recently, about how, you know, it used to be that neighbors would get together and you know, families would get together and you'd talk to people. It's not like that. Everybody goes into their homes and they're on the internet and they're isolated, even with their own homes. And there's something that's empty. They desire to be with others. They're missing something. And we need to be people to show them what it is they're missing. They're missing Jesus Christ. They're missing Jesus Christ. Acts 8, verse 4. Acts 8, verse 4. Therefore, those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the gospel. So we know this is persecution. Listen, the church has always grown fastest under persecution, hasn't it? I'm just hoping that isn't what has to happen here in America for the church to start growing again. Because persecution's no fun. I'd much rather not have it and keep the church growing than for it to happen. But we see that. So this is what happened there. The Christians were driven out of Jerusalem. And as they went out of Jerusalem, everywhere they went, they were preaching the gospel. Preaching the gospel everywhere they went. And planting those seeds. Listen, we are seed planters and seed waterers. If you are going to grow a garden, can you just go in your backyard and say, okay, I'm just going to sit here and watch the garden grow? No, you got to get out there and you got to twirl the soil up, don't you? You got to dig the soil, get some of the rocks out of the way. And then you got to plant the right kind of seeds. Right? You can't just prepare the soil, and that's important, and get the fertilizer, all that stuff. Sometimes we got to do that, right? We got to prepare the soil to plant the seed in people's lives. But then you got to plant the seed. You got to plant the seed. Then you got to water the seed, or maybe somebody else will come along and water the seed. But you got to plant those seeds. And you don't know what seed's going to grow, what one isn't. And you don't know what time frame. You may plant a seed in 10, 20, 30, 40 years it will take root. But you got to plant the seeds or they're not going to be there to grow. So we've got to rev it up, folks. We've got to rev it up. Listen, Satan is revving it up. He's pushing all this transgender and homosexual agenda and abortion and on and on and on, and alcohol and drugs. I mean, we can go on and on and on. And he isn't shy about it. He is not shy about it. We Christians have got to get bold and plant the seed. But you say, oh, but maybe I'll offend people. Maybe I'll drive them away with my boldness or whatever. Well, if you don't do something, it sure aren't going to come. And I can't say you won't drive them away because the gospel attracts as well as repels. But if you don't become bold and you don't get that word of God out there, people are not going to be converted. People are not going to come to Christ. And you will be held accountable because you are accountable to bring the gospel to the world to the best of your ability. So, To grow the church takes work, it takes effort, it takes energy, it takes money. Listen, if we're going to truly evangelize, we got to have materials and different things to use as resources and such. In fact, just this last week, a couple of weeks ago, I had a wonderful Native American lady come in, and she was traveling from another town, and she doesn't even go to the Church of Christ, but she come here and she listened to a Wednesday night service, and then she traveled on. I got an email message from her that she really liked the book that we were using. And she wanted to know if she could have one. And I said, yeah, you can come back by here. We'll be more than happy to give you one. So she came back by this last Wednesday, and she wanted one, and then she asked for one for her mother, and then she asked for one that we were using on a different Bible study night. And I gave her those books, those resources, and she told me that she had gone back to her town, and she went to a new church, and the minister was talking about how it's okay to drink and do smoke and things, and she was saying, and I goes, I remember when I was in your class the other Wednesday night, and you teaching from the Bible, that's not wrong. That's it's wrong to do those things. And we're planting some seeds. We was able to give her some material. She can't come here. She lives in another town. And there's not a solid Church of Christ in that town, unfortunately. But we were able to plant some seeds and give her some material. So it takes money, energy, effort. But let's go everywhere, scattering seeds, preaching the gospel, and do the best that we can to grow the membership in the Lord's church, the Church of Christ. If you're watching this today and you're not a member of the Lord's church, if you've not been baptized correctly to wash away your sins, please go find a Church of Christ in your area and talk to them about it. Tell them that you want to be saved, how the Bible says to be saved. Maybe you've gone to the Church of Christ in the past and you've gone away for some reason. Please go back. Life is short and life is dangerous. We're to be prepared. We're to be ready. And we must be in the Lord's church if we're going to be saved. Maybe you're watching this today and you're a shut-in, or providentially you can't be at worship service this Sunday. And if that's so, this can be your worship service, your sermon, of course, your sermon study time. But don't forget to do the other acts of worship, to pray to the Lord, to sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to the Lord, to give of your means to the Lord, and take the Lord's Supper. If you found this video useful, please share it with others. I thank you so much for watching, and God